The moment a power grid collapses, time does not simply continue as usual. It begins to compress. Systems that once operated invisibly in the background, refrigeration cycles, supply chain synchronization, temperature-controlled transportation, automated inventory logistics, stop functioning in layers. At first, the silence feels temporary. Lights go out. Refrigerators stop humming. Digital displays fade. People wait, assuming the interruption will resolve itself within hours. But if the grid does not return, the timeline of modern food security begins to contract rapidly, and within days, the invisible architecture that keeps billions of meals flowing collapses into scarcity. The danger is not only that food becomes unavailable. The deeper risk is that the food people already possess begins to deteriorate faster than most realize. Without continuous refrigeration, climate control, regular resupply, stored food becomes a biological system under pressure, governed by chemistry, microbial growth, and thermodynamics rather than convenience. In a true grid-down scenario, understanding how food decays and how it can be preserved without electricity becomes a matter of survival. Modern societies operate on a principle known in logistics science as just-in-time distribution. Grocery stores appear full, warehouses appear stocked, and transport networks appear constant. Yet most urban supermarkets carry only a few days of inventory. The apparent abundance is an illusion maintained by synchronized deliveries that arrive daily or even hourly. The system works because refrigerated trucks, warehouse chillers, barcode inventory algorithms, and fuel distribution networks remain uninterrupted. The moment electricity fails across a region, these layers begin shutting down sequentially. Refrigerated trailers cannot maintain temperature indefinitely. Warehouse cooling systems stop. Fuel pumps at distribution centers cease operating without backup power. Traffic control infrastructure fails, slowing transport corridors. Within 24 to 72 hours, the flow of fresh food halts. What remains in homes and local stores becomes the entire food reserved for that community. The most immediate threat inside individual homes is temperature drift. Refrigeration works by continuously removing heat energy from a closed space. When electricity stops, that system stops extracting heat, but heat from the surrounding environment continues, flowing inward through the insulation. The internal temperature of a refrigerator can rise from safe levels near 4 degrees Celsius to microbial growth zones above 10 degrees Celsius within several hours, depending on ambient conditions and door openings. Freezers provide a longer buffer because frozen mass contains stored thermal energy, but even a full freezer eventually warms. Ice crystals melt, cellular structures in meat and vegetables rupture, and dormant microorganisms begin reactivating. Many households believe frozen food remains safe for days or even weeks if left undisturbed. In reality, once thawing begins, bacteria resume metabolic activity. The clock toward spoilage begins immediately. This is where a widespread misunderstanding appears. Many people believe food preservation is primarily about sealing containers or preventing air exposure. While oxygen control is important, the deeper factor governing spoilage is microbial ecology. Bacteria, yeasts, and molds exist everywhere, in soil, on surfaces, on the food itself. Under favorable temperature and moisture conditions, these microorganisms multiply exponentially. A single bacterium dividing every 20 minutes can produce millions of descendants in less than half a day. Refrigeration slows this reproduction but does not eliminate it. Once refrigeration disappears, the microbial clock accelerates again. Food safety becomes a race against microscopic population growth. However, long before electricity existed, civilizations preserved food for months or even years. The techniques were not based on modern appliances, but on manipulating the environmental conditions microbes require to survive. These conditions are temperature, water availability, acidity, and oxygen concentration. Change one or more of these factors, and microbial growth slows or stops. Understanding this principle reveals the foundation of what some preparedness experts refer to as forbidden or overlooked food storage methods. Not because they are illegal or secret, but because modern consumers rarely think about them anymore. These methods rely on physics and chemistry rather than electrical infrastructure. One of the most powerful scientific principles in food preservation is water activity. Microorganisms require free water to grow. By removing water or binding it chemically, food becomes inhospitable to microbial metabolism. Drying is the oldest example. When moisture content drops below critical thresholds, bacteria cannot replicate efficiently. Traditional drying methods, sun drying, air curing, dehydration near controlled heat sources, convert perishable foods into stable materials that can last months. But the effectiveness of drying is not simply about removing visible moisture. The internal water activity must drop low enough to prevent microbial enzymes from functioning. This is why properly dried grains, legumes, and jerky remain stable for long periods when stored correctly. Salt preservation works on the same scientific principle but through a different mechanism. Salt draws water out of microbial cells through osmotic pressure. When bacteria lose water across their membranes, their internal biochemical processes collapse. Historically, salted fish, cured meats, and brined vegetables allowed communities to store protein sources through winter months without refrigeration. The salt concentration required for effective preservation is higher than what most modern diets prefer, which is why these methods gradually disappeared as refrigeration replaced them. Yet in a grid-down environment, salt becomes not only a seasoning but a critical preservation chemical. Acidity provides another layer of microbial control. Most harmful bacteria struggle to survive in highly acidic environments. Fermentation exploits this vulnerability by allowing beneficial microbes to convert sugars into organic acids such as lactic acid. As acidity increases, competing pathogens cannot establish themselves. This transformation turns perishable vegetables into stable foods like sauerkraut, kimchi, and pickled products that can remain edible for months without refrigeration. Fermentation is not random spoilage. It is controlled microbial competition guided by salt concentration, temperature, and anaerobic conditions. Evidence for the effectiveness of these preservation systems comes from both historical practice and modern microbiology. Archaeological studies have uncovered dried grains, stored for years in sealed containers that remain viable. Laboratory experiments confirm that lowering water activity below certain thresholds prevents bacterial growth. Food safety research consistently shows that properly fermented foods maintain stable acidity levels that inhibit pathogens. These techniques are not folklore. They are applications of measurable biochemical limits. For survival planning, the implication is profound. The real challenge in a prolonged power outage is not only obtaining food, but stabilizing it before microbial decay accelerates. The window for action is often measured in hours or days. Fresh meat, dairy, and cooked foods begin entering dangerous bacterial growth zones quickly once temperatures rise. Without intervention, a household's entire refrigerator inventory can become unsafe within a short period. Understanding alternative preservation methods allows that food to be converted into longer-lasting forms rather than wasted. Yet another misconception complicates the situation. Many people assume canned food alone solves the problem of long-term storage. Commercial canning does provide remarkable shelf stability, but the process relies on industrial equipment capable of achieving temperatures high enough to destroy bacterial spores, including the resilient spores of Clostridium botulinum. Home canning can replicate some of these conditions using pressure canners, but most households do not possess large reserves of fuel or equipment needed to maintain continuous sterilization operations during an emergency. Relying solely on canned goods, therefore, limits food security to what was already sealed before the crisis began. The hidden science that experienced survival planners consider involves combining multiple preservation principles simultaneously. Drying combined with salting reduces water activity dramatically. Fermentation followed by cool storage stabilizes vegetables for extended periods. Root cellaring, an ancient technique, uses the thermal stability of underground environments to maintain temperatures low enough to slow microbial growth without electricity. Soil several feet below the surface maintains a relatively constant temperature year-round. Because Earth acts as an enormous thermal mass, this natural insulation prevents rapid temperature swings and creates an environment where certain crops such as potatoes, carrots, onions, and squash can remain edible for months. Modern studies of soil thermal conductivity demonstrate why root cellars work. At depths beyond approximately 1 meter, daily temperature fluctuations nearly disappear. Seasonal changes still occur, but the shifts are gradual. In temperate climates, underground storage spaces often remain between 4 and 10 degrees Celsius through much of the year. Temperatures similar to refrigeration. Long before mechanical cooling existed, farmers used this property to store harvests through winter. Today, Today, many urban residents have never encountered such systems, yet the physics behind them has not changed. The danger in a grid-down scenario is that most households are disconnected from these older methods. Food arrives packaged, chilled, and ready to cook. Preservation is outsourced to factories and power plants. When that infrastructure fails, knowledge becomes as critical as supplies. A freezer full of meat may appear like a security reserve, but without electricity, it becomes a rapidly deteriorating resource. Converting that meat into shelf-stable forms through drying, curing, or pressure preservation requires preparation and understanding. As hours pass during a large-scale blackout, another layer of risk emerges. Communities begin realizing the outage is not temporary. Refrigerated warehouses warm. Grocery stores cannot maintain safe temperatures. Workers cannot process or transport perishable goods. The entire cold chain collapses simultaneously across large regions. At this stage, the amount of food physically present in society has not yet vanished, but the mechanisms that keep it safe are failing. Millions of tons of food begin approaching spoilage thresholds at the same time. The situation forces a difficult realization. The modern food system is not fragile because it lacks production capacity. It is fragile because it depends on continuous energy to maintain stability. Without that energy, every piece of food becomes subject to the same biological clock that governed ancient societies. Microbes reclaim nutrients unless humans actively intervene with preservation science. Understanding this dynamic transforms the idea of emergency preparedness. Stockpiling alone is not enough. Food must be managed as a living system where temperature, moisture, oxygen, and microbial activity interact continuously. The so-called forbidden methods are simply the forgotten engineering solutions that earlier generations relied upon when electricity did not exist. But the collapse of refrigeration is only the first stage of the problem. As grid failures extend beyond several days, another less obvious factor begins to threaten stored food supplies. Environmental instability itself. Temperature swings, humidity changes, and contamination risks begin interacting with stored resources in ways most households have never considered. The deeper science of food stability under these conditions reveals why many supplies that appear secure can degrade silently over time.